In week 10 of the 2024 NFL season, we had blowouts, we've had close games, we had controversy, and I'm going to get to it all. But before we start, I just want to say a PSA to everybody out there. For everybody that doubts Brandon's best bets, guess what, folks? In week number 10, Brandon's best bets went 5-4-5. We nailed Cincinnati plus 6.5 against Baltimore, Pittsburgh plus 3 against Washington, Buffalo minus 4.5 against the Indianapolis Colts, Minnesota minus 4.5 against Jacksonville. That did go up once the injury was announced to Trevor Lawrence, but we got it at 4.5. And then the Chargers minus 7.5 against the Tennessee Titans. If you did that our way on FanDuel, you got $5 for about a profit of $119 and so change there. We are now 31 for 50 on the year in best bets. Last year at this time for best bets, we were 32 for 49 with one push. So again, about right there on the same track. In the money line, I did go 9-5. That puts me at 101 and 51 on the year. Last year, I was at 102 and 48. So there were again two more games played at this time last year, or this year, excuse me, as opposed to last year. And that has to deal with obviously the bye weeks and the scenarios that the NFL sets up. But we had 9 one-score games this week in week 10, and the 1 o'clock window started a little bit shaky. Then after that, we were pretty much on a roll on the money line, only missing the Dolphins again after the 1 o'clock window. But some crazy games here. And obviously, we got to start with Baltimore Cincinnati. Baltimore wins the game 35-34. We all know the story. Cincinnati had the game in hand midway for the third quarter. Baltimore causes a fumble. The out route by the receiver there going down the sideline, 84 yards. Tie game, completely changed the game. Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow going back and forth. Jamar Chase having a tremendous night, over 250 yards, 3 touchdowns, including what should have been, in my opinion, the game tying score. And that's where obviously we're going to get to, the fact that Cincinnati goes for two. There was defensive holding on the play. There should have been a roughing the passer penalty on the play. Neither of them were called. So I'm going to first address the penalty situation because the NFL over the last couple of weeks, and I said this going back to week 1 and week 2, going into the year, it felt like the way the officials were calling it. Again, if you remember week 1 when Baltimore had all those illegal procedure penalties because the offensive linemen were not lining up right, um, that seemed to be a point of emphasis in the NFL this year, was making sure that linemen, receivers, tight ends, whoever was on the line of scrimmage was lining up evenly. And so we've seen more illegal formations, and with the RPOs and the ineligible man downfield, those have been the two most penalized calls in the National Football League this year. By virtue, the NFL has allowed, and we saw it in the Texans Lions game Sunday night, where there was a controversial play that should have been PI on Detroit. We also saw Jared Goff get smashed at the end of that helmet for roughing the passer that was not called. But we've seen, defensive pass interference, I think, not be as called as much this year. The NFL has allowed DBs to get more antsy, more physical. They're letting the receivers do the same. Unless there's an obvious push off, they're not calling OPI. And they are letting them fight down the field like it was back in the day. But again, they're making up for it with all these illegal formations and ineligible man downfield penalties. Obviously, they were clear misses. But I will say the NFL and those officials, led by obviously Clete Blakeman, let those guys play the entire evening. Again, one of those calls should have been made. Cincinnati should have had another shot at it. But I digress. In my opinion, that's not the bigger story. The bigger story is, and people want to talk about the fact that, Todd Bowles didn't go for two, and that cost Mbappe the game last week against Kansas City. And on Tuesday, I came on here last week and said, no, it did not. That call by Todd Bowles, Kansas City had 27 seconds left with 3 timeouts. And everybody's going to say, yeah, well, Kansas City didn't get it. Your play calling changes and your mentality changes when you are in a tie game versus being down by one because you have four downs instead of three to get a first down. That changes the entire sequence. We would have not known, right, if Kansas City um gets the ball and goes, you know, 30, 40 yards, gets in field goal range with the new kickoff rules now, ball being at the 30. The odds are pretty good for Mahomes with four downs opposed to three to get in field goal range. With Cincinnati, I thought the biggest mistake was they took their timeout with like 30, 40 seconds left. They did not let that clock wind down. If we're under 20 seconds, and even with Justin Tucker, who missed an extra point earlier in the game, he has struggled more this season than in years past. Then I would consider going for two and going for the win when you don't feel like Lamar Jackson has enough time to come back and win that game. But if you go for two there and you make it, still, Baltimore has about 30 or so seconds left. They got a couple timeouts in their back pocket for Lamar Jackson to get, 20, 25 yards, set up Justin Tucker in field goal range. It's certainly doable. Obviously, if you make the extra point, the same scenario could happen. But here's my thing. If you miss the 2 point conversion, which NFL 2 point conversion rates are down significantly this year as opposed to years prior. And I think it's because more teams have studied it on defense because more teams are going for 2 point conversions. That if you miss the hit rate of the onside kick, which I think they need to completely abolish the onside kick. I mean, there's no chance of recovery. Essentially, you have to get the luckiest bounce in the world to do so. I would like to see the 4th and 15 from a team's own 35-yard line. If they convert, then obviously they keep possession. If not, it goes to the other team. But the rate of kicking an onside kick and recovering it is so low that if you don't get that kick there, you lose. Or at least if you make the extra point, either go to overtime where you give yourselves a 50-50 shot. And by the way, your defense, in my opinion, has gotten more stops in the game than Baltimore's defense had on you. And you're giving yourself a better chance, in my opinion, that you expect to at least touch the ball one more time. Joe Burrow and give your offense, which is better than your defense, a shot there. So I would have kicked the extra point. I thought it was the wrong decision by Zach Taylor, and this was a daggering loss for Cincinnati because now their AFC North hopes are shot. This is a two-team race for the division between Baltimore and Pittsburgh, which do play this Sunday in the 1 p.m. window in Pittsburgh. Cincinnati can still make the playoffs, but they're going to have to do so as a 6 or 7 seed in the wild card. Good for Bryce Young. Good for the Panthers. They played well. Bryce Young has gotten better since coming back from his benching. Daniel Jones and the New York Football Giants are a disaster. They passed on a quarterback last year's draft in a worse quarterback class this year. I don't think they're going to pass on a quarterback. No need to spend a lot of time on this. Carolina wins 2017. Dave Ridley and the New Orleans Saints. I told you I did not feel comfortable about Atlanta. I told you Falcons and Saints always played close games. I told you the Saints and that interim head coach, boost are going to fly out the wall for the first few weeks here, and then they'll obviously come crashing down a cliff. But good win there for the Saints. This is typical Falcons, whether it's Raheem Morris regime, Arthur Smith, Mike Smith, whoever the Falcons have had, Dan Quinn, during the past 25 years of my life. You can never trust the Atlanta Falcons. They came out sluggish again. Kirk Cousins had another pedestrian game against the Saints defense. And again, just when you think you could trust Atlanta, they turned into an abject disaster. That was a bad loss. Yes, it was a division game. Yes, anything could happen. But with Tampa Bay losing to San Francisco, you could have all but wrapped up the NFC South with that victory. Speaking of that, Christian McCaffrey came back. Deebo Samuel started fighting with Jake Moody because he missed 3 field goals. And the Niners barely survived against a Tampa team without Mike Evans, without Chris Godwin. And this is a Tampa team that started 4-2. They're now 4-6. And they, obviously they lose the game to Baltimore on a Monday night. And then after that, they lose to their division rival Atlanta. Now they lose here to San Francisco. Um, and they are just, in my opinion, not the same team. Baker Mayfield tries to do whatever he can without Mike Evans, without Chris Godwin, but he's not putting up the passing yards that he needs to do. Again, you got the Baltimore loss on a Monday night. You had the Atlanta loss. You had the Kansas City loss on a Monday night. And now you have the San Francisco loss. So after starting 4-2, they're 4-6. They got swept by Atlanta this season. So again, they almost have to run the table here to win the division. I still think there's an outside shot they could get in as a wild card team. Mike Evans is going to come back here after their week 11 bye. They got the Giants, after their bye, so maybe that's a Kickstarter for them. Uh, for San Francisco, not pretty. They dominated most of the game. Brock Purdy played well, but again, the missed field goals is maybe what kept Tampa Bay in this game. But San Francisco does not have the killer instinct they had in years past, especially with the Rams loss last night to Miami. I think they're better than Seattle. I think there's really a two-team division now between San Francisco and Arizona. And to me, the Niners, even though Arizona beat them earlier in the year, are better than Arizona. So despite San Francisco right now sitting at 5-4, they may be the 4 seed heading into the postseason, and they could get a Green Bay or a Minnesota, which would be a tough matchup, even at San Francisco in that scenario. But I still think the Niners now, McCaffrey's back. Their offense looks better than it has in past weeks. I just don't know if they're as deep and as talented as they have been dominating people the last few years. Okay, again, I called it. Pittsburgh +3. So we hit Cincinnati +6.5. Then we got Pittsburgh +3. Boy, this was a back and forth game, and I'm not gonna lie to you. When it was, at one point 27, 20, or 14 Washington, excuse me, I was nervous for this bet, not particularly for Washington to win, even though they do take on my Philadelphia Eagles this Thursday night. And my Washington Commanders fan, Austin Arnold, is going to be on the show tomorrow. But the fact that Russell Wilson, just incredible the way he's been playing. And Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, they get the run game going. And then obviously Russ with the big throw to Mike Williams late for the game winning score. Funny how that works. Mike Williams couldn't catch a ball with the New York Jets, comes to Pittsburgh, catches the game winning touchdown. Then they get the Commanders to jump off sides. And Jane Daniels and the Washington Commanders are a great story. They're led by a great leader in Dan Quinn. They are just a young team that needs to learn how to win. Again, I still think they're still a playoff team. I don't know if they're going to win the division. They got a big game here on a short week against Philly, where I think they will just bury the tape. Dan Quinn has played the Eagles rough in the past. The Washington Commanders have always matched up well with Philadelphia. The Commanders have gone into Philly in the past and won games, as Philly has gone into Washington in the past and won games. So it's going to be a phenomenal game. So is Pittsburgh and Baltimore. Um, and just what a great game between these two teams. Russell Wilson in the end making plays for Pittsburgh. But I will say this, it comes back to, again, I thought the Steelers would start off the year 6-3, finish 9-8. They're now 7-2. If they beat Baltimore on Sunday, they would be 8-2. I have the Steelers splitting with their division rivals, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, in the regular season. I don't care. We just saw it with New Orleans and Atlanta again. Excuse me. I don't really care about records when it comes to divisional play. And so, with that in mind, I still think that is the case. But the Steelers are better offensively than I thought they would be with Russ under center. Okay, Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears. This was my nightmare coming into this game. That's why I said I did not want to take the Bears -6.5. I didn't trust them. The Bears have not recovered since the Hail Mary loss against the Commanders. If that play goes the Bears' way, who knows? Maybe after a comeback grueling victory by the Bears, maybe their season completely turns around. But New England has gone up, even though they've lost a couple games ever since Drake May has been inserted into the starting lineup because Drake May is a better passer than Jacoby Brissett, and he's more mobile than Jacoby Brissett. And their defense has gotten better over the last couple weeks. The Bears, ever since that Commanders game, have not scored an offensive touchdown. And you can talk about Caleb Williams all you want, but go watch the All 22 like I have on some of the Bears routes. Nobody's getting open. And this team upgraded that quarterback, in my opinion. They upgraded that receiver, and their offense has gotten worse. Okay, that's coaching. So, one, Shane Waldron is clearly not the offensive coordinator for this position. Their offensive line is atrocious. Some of it's on Caleb Williams, and some of it's the O line. He got sacked 9 times against New England. 9 as a rookie. Not going to cut it. Matt Eberflus has ultimately not been able to motivate his football team after that damaging loss. And they're still talking about it. And they ask DJ Moore and they ask Caleb Williams every single week if they have confidence in their head coach. This was a Bears team that was supposed to be the best Bears team of my lifetime. Maybe even better than the team that made it to the Super Bowl against the Indianapolis Colts because they were certainly more talented. And Chicago Bears fans are calling radio stations and screaming at games that Mitch Trubisky right now would be a better option than Caleb Williams. And I'm going to make this point about Mitch Trubisky. Chicago fans wanted to run Matt Nagy and Mitch Trubisky out of town, and Matt Nagy got Mitch Trubisky to the playoffs twice in 3 years with a healthy Matthew Stafford and a good Aaron Rodgers. Not this Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. I don't even want to talk about the Jets in their division. This is an abject failure by the Bears organization because this kid, Caleb Williams, if you put him in Washington right now with the roles are reversed, is he having the same success that Shane Daniels has? Yes. Is Shane Daniels turning into what Caleb Williams would be doing if Shane Daniels was in Chicago? I believe so, yes. Because where you land, it matters. And to me, it's a fireable offense for the entire Chicago coaching staff. Maybe not Ryan Poles, because Ryan Poles has learned to be a good general manager in the past. But when Drake May, with nothing around him, looks considerably better than your number one overall pick with all the offensive talent in the world around him, and I didn't even mention Cole Kmet at tight end or DeAndre Swift at running back. Folks, I have no words for what's going on with Chicago. And now they do play at home, but it's going to be against Green Bay, and they're coming off their bye. Good luck. Okay, for some reason, everybody loved Indianapolis in this spot, plus 4.5 against Buffalo. I did not. I don't know what is the affiliation with Joe Flacco. Maybe it's because he was so good in Cleveland a year ago. He has not been good in Indianapolis. I've been trying to tell you this. The Colts are not a good football team. And yeah, Anthony Richardson was bad. You can't survive on, less than 50% completion percentage in the NFL. But Joe Flacco's not doing much better. He's about 55%, which is still not going to win in this league. And everybody thought Buffalo was going to walk into Kansas City. I did not think that was the case. I didn't think the Colts were talented enough. Listen, they got some turnovers early, and this game was close early on. Buffalo pulled away at the half, and Amari Cooper didn't even play. And Amari Cooper, ever since that trade to Buffalo, he's been almost non-existent for the Bills. And they're still winning. And now they take on Kansas City, who, despite what we say about their postseason and Josh Allen not defeating Patrick Mahomes, he can certainly do it in the regular season. And, this game here, we obviously know what Kansas City did, blocking the field goal against Denver. Bottom line is they won. And this game will basically be for the number one seed because if Buffalo falls to Kansas City next week, the Kansas City Chiefs will all but wrap up already in week 11, the number one seed in the AFC. For Indianapolis at 4-6, they were a nice story. They've been an up and down team all year long. They sort of fallen off here the last couple of weeks. They get the Jets on the road. Um, I still don't think that they are a playoff team. And I think that AFC South, Houston obviously lost, Indy lost, Jacksonville lost, Tennessee lost. They all lost. It's not a good division. Period. We thought the AFC South was no longer for bottom feeders. Guess what? It still is. Speaking of bottom feeders, Mac Jones was not great. They scored on a QB sneak. They were winning this game 7-3 at one point. The Vikings made four field goals. And Sam Darnold has turned back into the Sam Darnold we knew in New York and Carolina. Yes, he has. Sam Darnold has not been the same over the last month. Now, Brian Flores' defense over the last couple of weeks has turned it on, but again, it's been against bad quarterbacks, Joe Flacco and Mac Jones. The Vikings, to me, it's like, yes, they only have two losses. Yes, they're a half game back of Detroit for the NFC North lead. But even though they took it to Detroit at home and they always play close games at home, do we feel like the Vikings are better than the Lions? I don't. Even though they beat Green Bay on the road, that was Jordan Love's first game back from his week one injury he suffered in Brazil against Philadelphia. Do we feel like, you know, Minnesota's better than Green Bay? Because right now, sitting here, I don't. I don't know how to feel about the Vikings. One week their offense is good, one week their defense is good. They're too inconsistent, and it smells like a team to me that even though, yes, they did beat San Francisco pretty handily week two in Minnesota, these two will match up for a five versus a four matchup potentially in the NFC wildcard round. And in San Francisco, in that situation, with them obviously knowing Darnold from him being on their squad last year, I would take San Francisco. Okay. Denver outplayed Kansas City, who went to overtime against Tampa. And I told you, just like Tampa against San Francisco, teams that go to overtime the next week generally do not play well. Um, and the Chiefs, man, they should have lost this game. Patrick Mahomes was off. Bo Nix played great. Really, I thought handled the environment in GEHA Field at Arrowhead very well. But that was not just luck that Denver and Will Watts missed that field goal at the end of the game. That was the Chiefs overpowering Denver and getting the block and making a play on the football and being the heart of a champion. And what else can you say for the Swifties besides Denver was close, they had the game won, and then they didn't? If you're a Broncos fan, again, I think you ought to feel encouraged. They are right there with their division rival Chargers, for a playoff spot in the AFC. And Bo Nix, a rookie, again, I think along with Jane Daniels, he's the second best rookie right now in that class. He's gotten better every week. They have played well on the road for the most part. They bounced back after getting hammered by Baltimore the week before. And so don't feel discouraged here if you're Denver. You add the game one. You played Kansas City very well in the last few years. You just, until last year, were unable to close out those games. So that's my takeaway, man. The Chiefs are just really good. They win, they lose. It really doesn't matter. They're the motto of consistency. We have really no concerns about them. And by the way, they're doing this without Hollywood Brown, Rasheed Rice, and Isaiah Pacheco. Imagine when at least Brown and Pacheco get back and you still have Kareem Hunt, DeAndre Hopkins, and of course Travis Kelce himself in the fold. Chargers took care of business 27-17. This is exactly what I thought the Chargers would be this year. Run the football with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. Throw the football with Justin Herbert on time, play action pass, get the football out. And the Titans are going to be looking for a quarterback next year. Okay, so Arizona, they have won three in a row. Their wins are against the Dolphins on a last second field goal in Tua's return game. They have beat the lowly Bears at this point, and then Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets, so we're just completely done. Um, the Jets are bad. Their offensive line is as bad as we feared going into the season. We said it was the one thing that was going to hold them back, but I don't even want to talk about Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, all those pieces. only scoring 6 points. I want to talk about the fact that, in my opinion, outside of them having a second half miracle against the Texans last Thursday night, where they had 3 wins, and two of their wins are on Thursday night, and the only other win, they barely beat the Tennessee Titans in week 2. Think about that if you're a Jets fan. If you play on a Sunday or Monday, you have lost every time except for one time this year. But this defense, and I got to give Arizona credit, their offensive coordinator, Drew Pensing, obviously Jonathan Gannon, the head coach, Kyler Murray. They're getting Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride more involved. Benson and James Conner in the run game just took apart the Jets. And Arizona and Kyler Murray has looked more comfortable at this point than at any point in his entire career. And Arizona is a legit, in my opinion, NFC wildcard threat. You can make a case they're a divisional threat, but I think that sort of depends on what San Francisco does here down the stretch, as I alluded to. This game was not competitive. At least Philadelphia, Dallas in the first half was somewhat competitive. And again, that was mostly Philadelphia's illegitimate mistakes. Jalen Hurts hanging onto the football too long, in some cases, taking 5 sacks in the first half. And obviously, that's a divisional rivalry game. This game was not close. The Jets are an abject failure, just like the Bears. The Jets and the Bears are the two teams I got wrong going into this year. Very disappointed in the Jets, and it's time for them to admit the Aaron Rodgers era should be over. The experiment was a bad one. This team is not going anywhere. As I mentioned, Philadelphia and Dallas, it was a 10-6 game going in a half, or excuse me, a 14-6 game going in a half. Philadelphia just barraged them 20-0 in the second half, came out and forced their will. 26 Saquon Barkley got going. Jalen Hurts started to hit. A.J. Brown down the sideline started to take care of the football. The defense forcing 3 turnovers in that second half. 2 strip fumbles as well as a interception. And Nick Sirianni, who I keep saying, to me is a lot like Dan Campbell. And you all want to bash on Nick Sirianni because he's flamboyant, because he's this, because he makes radical decisions. But the Eagles have gotten better. And Kellen Moore and the offense has evolved ever since the bye week. And the defense is getting better week in and week out. Jalen Carter is the leader now up front of that defensive line. Even Bryce Huff, now that they've started to put him in that wide-9 stance out front, is starting to get more of a pass rush. And Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell on the outside. Cooper DeJean in the slot, Quinyon Mitchell on the outside, along with Darius Slay, has completely transformed that Philadelphia secondary. Avante Maddox was starting before the bye. Now Cooper DeJean gets inserted into the slot. Quinyon Mitchell getting better as the year goes on, as rookies typically do. Unless your name's Caleb Williams in Chicago. Yeah. Dallas' season is over. At this point, I think they should try Trey Lance. What do you have to lose? Micah Parsons out here taking shots at Mike McCarthy on his podcast. I really don't care. This was a Cowboys team that, again, I thought could win 8 or 9 games. I did not think they were anything special. Did not think they were close to Detroit, Philadelphia, Green Bay, Minnesota, in their own conference. And with the Dak injury now, I said this was a CeeDee Lamb or bust offense. There you go. Houston, we gotta have this conversation about CJ Stroud. They were up 23-7 at halftime. Detroit scored the last 23. And this was as bad of a loss, in my opinion, for a team that you could get because the Detroit Lions and Jared Goff threw 5 interceptions. And I do think, even in a dome now, we do have a little bit of a formula of how Detroit could be vulnerable, which is you blitz them, you put some pressure on Goff, you double team Amon-Ra St. Brown, and you force Jared Goff to make quick decisions, to speed up his clock. Because if you take away the run game and you put pressure on Jared Goff, he's not the same quarterback. And Houston was flying around. They were playing with their hair on fire in the first half. They got to that big lead. And then Carlton Davis, as Dan Campbell was doing his halftime interview with Melissa Stark, obviously Davis got the interception. And it just felt like that turned the game around and gave the Lions momentum, and the Lions never gave up, and they just kept fighting. The grit that Dan Campbell talked about came through, and they win the game 26-23. This was a big win for Detroit because now the Lions can say, we threw 5 interceptions. We basically played a Madden game in real life because that's what that was. I mean, the third quarter took forever. Interceptions, turnovers, back and forth. Again, the missed call with the EI, which led Houston to punt, which allowed Detroit to drive right down the field. But in the end, the Lions can say, we played like shit and we won. That will be a huge benefit for them going forward. For Houston, again, I think this year they have not played a complete game yet. And I think CJ Stroud has struggled throughout the entire season. So when I look at that, I think they're in a bad division. I don't think they're the same without Stephon Diggs or Nico Collins. Joe Mixon got taken away in the second half, and they were not the same offense. Right now, there's a Joe Mixon or bust offense for Houston. Is Stroud very talented? Yes. Is he one of the most accurate passers in the NFL currently? Yes. Has he played up to his standard this year? No. I think Houston's the benefit of a bad division. And I got to tell you what, if they go, if they're the 4 seed in the AFC, which, to me, it's looking like a real possibility because Baltimore, Buffalo, Kansas City are better than them. And if Pittsburgh wins the division, they're probably going to have a better record than Houston. If Houston takes on a Baltimore, if they don't win the division, if Pittsburgh does in that wild card round, just like they did last year, I would take Baltimore to beat Houston. If they were to by chance take on a Charger team who can run the ball, ground and pound, that'd be a very interesting matchup. Two dome teams there in the wild card round. Miami saved their season last night. The Rams kicked 5 field goals, and even with Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and their offensive line back, I thought that was a chance for the Rams to reestablish themselves to get back in the NFC West race, and they were just flat. And Miami, they got Vegas and New England coming up. If they win both of those games, they go from 2-6 to 5-6. And all of a sudden, you're sitting here in a Thanksgiving game against the Green Bay Packers, the primetime game at night, and Miami's won 3 in a row. You would have Tua going outdoors um, to Green Bay, which would not be ideal in my opinion. But that would be to get right back in the race because, again, that AFC wildcard picture, Chargers, Denver, maybe for that last final spot. I thought Miami's season was over. I just did not think that their defense was very good. I did not think Tua was very good, which I still didn't think he was great last night. Tyreek Hill somehow has had a horrible season. Part of that has been without Tua, but a lot of it was with Tua. Uh, but is there a chance the Dolphins save their season? Potentially. They win 23-15. So again, overall, I think this was a separation week. I think in the AFC, you got obviously Kansas City, Baltimore, Buffalo. I think Pittsburgh is probably the fourth best team in that conference right now, believe it or not. Then I would say, you got the Houston, you got the Chargers, and I would even throw Cincinnati, even though they're 4-6, along with Denver in that conversation. I think the NFC right now is clearly Detroit and Philly, and everybody else, Atlanta, Arizona, even San Francisco, and a Green Bay and a Minnesota, to this point is a rung below. And Washington could get in that upper echelon if they beat Philadelphia Thursday night. A reminder again, Commanders fan Austin Arnold on Brandon's World tomorrow. Like that clip from the Brandon's World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brandon's World podcast right here on YouTube.